Metroidvanias have always interested me, but you might already know that by now. Still, it's a genre I've really come to love, and even though there's so many games I've yet to play, I'm trying to expand my palette more and more. Something else I've really come to love, especially when it comes to video games, is spin-offs. They exist in any medium where you can really have a franchise, but I think video games are probably the most interesting place for them. The interactivity at the core of games means that there's so much more room for you to spin off, whether talking thematically or in gameplay. It can be a great way to reinvent ideas and refresh a series without needing to worry about the constraints of that series or disappointing longtime fans. You can explore new concepts and gameplay styles entirely without alienating the core audience, but you can also try and introduce a new audience to the game in a way that's a lot more approachable than a main series title would be. There's a lot of great spin-offs out there, and a lot of not so great ones that are still pretty interesting. They always excite me though, regardless of quality. If you ask me, a bad spin-off's at least more interesting than a bad sequel that's completely by the numbers. And with this talk of fresh ideas and unique perspectives, one place you're bound to find them is fan games. And just like spin-offs, they're not necessarily going to be great, but they're always unique. I think fan games get a bad rep in the same way a lot of fan works do, which is getting unfairly written off just because they're quote-unquote less creative for being based in an existing universe. I think that could be a pretty unfair judgment to make though. Being inspired and even a little derivative is just kind of the root of all creativity. There exists no idea that hasn't been done or thought of in one way or another before. The uniqueness is in the how. The unique perspectives that guide these works to their creation, as well as the actual methods. Even the biggest of franchises are built off what already exists. They're derivative in one way or another. Fanworks just wear that more on their sleeve. With development tools being more and more accessible, as well as the general lower bar of entry, you could certainly have bad fan games, but it's pretty unfair to write them all off because of that, especially when nothing stops a fan game from being at a higher level of quality. That is purely on the creative side. When it comes to the legal side, that's where the trouble begins. It's unfortunate that, for the most part, the people who hold the IPs of these giant franchises tend to not regard fan work super well. Some people almost treat it as praiseworthy that developers simply let free mods and free fan games exist. And considering the outright hostility of companies like Nintendo when it comes to these kinds of works, it really isn't that surprising that to some people, the bare minimum of letting it exist is seen as something to be praised. There's a lot that could be said about IP law and about creative ownership, especially when it comes to companies that own IPs that they realistically don't have any real creative ownership over, with the actual developers behind them long since gone, but that's a whole other topic. Back to my point, there are thankfully a few developers out there who not only are pretty welcoming of fan games, but can actively embrace them. Valve has already been pretty well known for its healthy relationship with modders in the past, but they've also famously allowed not only one of the best fan-made works, but arguably to some, one of the best remakes in general on their storefront. Unfortunately, they also allowed one of probably the worst fan games to ever be made put on their storefront, so we call it even.
You fucked up my face.
Valve might be one of the best known AAA companies when it comes to this behavior, but I think there's one franchise that really takes the cake on fan works. That being the Touhou project series by Zun. Touhou itself is a doujin project, which basically means that it's an indie. It's extremely popular in its home country of Japan, and it has a pretty strong niche over here in the Western world too. A decent chunk of that fame does come from the creator's very lax views on fan works, having only a handful of stipulations, such as projects needing to stay indie, as well as giving proper credit to Zun and the original creators. This has helped the series kind of get into a cycle of popularity where, as it gets more fans, that's more people making fan works. And with more fan works, that's more people finding things that can make them fans of Touhou. There's even a lot of people that engage with the series without ever touching a mainline title. I'd confidently wager a good amount of money that a lot of people who know about Touhou watching this video right now have been exposed to it more through the fan works than they have the mainline games, if they've even seen a mainline game at all. It really should come as little surprise then that fans have recontributed to the gaming world with their own takes on the series. From mods and reskins to more grandiose spin-offs like fighting games, there's a whole lot. And of course, since I started the video talking about it, you can imagine there's a Metroidvania. Touhou Lunar Nights, which received its full release in 2019. It was developed by the group Team Ladybug, and it was actually their first release on Steam. They've gone on to release a couple more games since, including, holy shit, a Record of Blood War game. I didn't even know that until I was making this video. That gives me an excuse to go watch that show. Anyways, among the spin-offs, I'd say it's one of the ones a little more mainstream, but I still feel like it's a bit obscure. My first exposure to the game was playing it through Game Pass on Xbox. I didn't beat it, but I had a really good time with it. I recently grabbed it on Steam now with the intent to fully complete the game though. And the game was just too fun for me to not try and put a spotlight on it. Both for fans of Metroidvanias who might have been turned away thinking it had more to do with the Touhou series, or for Touhou fans who just don't know what to expect out of Metroidvania. That said, before I get into Lunar Nights, I think I ought to offer a little primer about Touhou for those who really don't know anything about it. So if you're currently watching this from under some kind of giant rock, hi under there, and you haven't been around enough Anamanga circles, you haven't looked into the history of bullet hells, played Undertale, heard of YTPMV before, played TF2, grace your eyes with the beauty that is the video Ronald McDonald Insanity, never heard of Bad Apple or any of the other dozen really popular songs, including but not limited to You Unknown was her, Septet for a Dead Princess, Night of Nights, which is a remix of Flowering Nights, Tomboyish Girl in Love, Adventures of a Love-Struck Tomboy, Love a Tomboyish Girl, I don't know what that song's officially called, but that song too! And Marissa Stole the Precious Thing, which I almost forgot to mention. Touhou started in 1997 and is the Tough as Nails bullet hell series. And I don't mean whatever people call bullet hells nowadays. I mean the hardest shit, more projectiles than you can count on the screen games. There aren't just a crazy amount of projectiles on the screen, but you're expected to do almost pixel-precise dodges in some difficulties. These games can be pretty notorious for that difficulty, with the highest difficulty Lunatic being downright crazy. For that reason, it's probably a little less surprising that there's a lot of fandom around the other aspects of the game other than the gameplay. Not to say there isn't a dedicated audience for that gameplay, because oh man. The series stars the shrine maiden Reimu Hakure, and is set in Gensokyo, where humans and yokai live alike. Yokai just being a term for Japanese mythological creatures. One of the aspects Touhou is probably known for is the moe style which the characters are depicted in. So if you want to disgustingly oversimplify it, the series is basically just anime girls drawn in a cutesy style, flying around shooting more projectiles than a fighter jet, with some of the best music you've ever heard playing. Outside of the narrative and stylistic elements though, there's also other gameplay elements that tend to reoccur even in all the fan games. That includes the Grey system, which while it appeared in other shoot-em-ups and bullet hells before, it's very associated with Touhou as a franchise. As you might gather from the name, it simply rewards the player for getting near but not actually hitting projectiles. Since 1997's highly responsive to prayers, yes, I will be using their full subtitles, they're cool. Zune and Team Shanghai Alice have released 20 mainline games alone, not even counting all the spin-offs that they've officially worked on. If you weren't aware of it, it honestly is kind of this insane juggernaut of independent work. The series also has a pretty huge cast of characters, a lot of whom are reoccurring or just fan favorites. While Lunar Nights obviously pulls from the back catalog of Touhou characters, and generally has a good amount of fan service, it really doesn't require a lot of understanding of the world of the story. I've heard a lot of Touhou fans describe Lunar Nights' plot as an excuse plot, and given how minimal the story actually is in the game, I believe that. Having prior knowledge and some amount of interest will definitely help your enjoyment of this game, but it's absolutely not necessary. To get back to the actual point of this video, and to talk about the stuff that's relevant to Lunar Nights, the game stars one Sakuya Izayoi, also known as the Maid of the Scarlet Devil Mansion, or the girl from that one tweet Toby Fox made about quicksand. A human maid is one of the more popular characters in the series. She was first introduced in Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. She's gone on to become pretty popular, frequently a protagonist or otherwise a main character in a lot of games. She's most well known for her abilities of time manipulation, as well as the use of throwing knives. Hey, wait a second. Vampires. Throwing knives. Stopping time. That's pretty cool, I wonder how Zune came up with that. And I really have to say, it all combines to make an absolutely fantastic moveset. While it all can take some getting used to, it can be super satisfying. And as you go along, the game really wrings out all the use you can get of your time stop abilities. As the sort of person who sits on my strong abilities to wait for the best opportunity to use them, it took some adjusting to know to use the time stop way more actively. But once I did, the game really opened up. There is this amazing feeling you get going back through an area you've been through before, and you know what to expect from it, and using your time stop combined with your other abilities to just completely fly through one area that might have been challenging to you before. Your moveset isn't exactly the most expansive like you'd see in another game, but the game just really makes every use of what you have. The knives are a really unique primary weapon. They can feel clunky sometimes, but there's a real flow to it once you get it down. They also use up your magic meter, which sounds annoying at first, but it's not too bad, honestly. It doesn't feel like it completely stops from mashing when you need to, but especially in boss fights, you need to be a little smart about how you use them. Something I love is that you can collect knives that have landed in the environment to get some MP back. Even without the gameplay function, just vacuuming up your old knives feels really fun to do. It also feels a lot easier to hit secret walls in this game with the knives. It saves a little bit of tedium from having to run across a room to hit the wall to be sure if it's fake or not. Plus it can help you find some completely on accident. Knives are also the crux of more or less every ability you have, even your movement ones. You throw down knives when you double jump, and during your slide you even kick with a knife too. Again, the game doesn't have a crazy expansive ability list, but you get what you need combined with the really inherently fun time stop ability that you start with. To say this game is a bullet hell would be kind of a lie, but it really draws out that energy more than you'd expect out of a game of this style. Things like the Grey system and all your attacks being ranged really encourage a certain bob and weave style of gameplay that's super fun. But it also manages to not stray far from what makes Metroidvania fun. This game in particular really draws from Castlevania. Some of it just comes from series parallels like vampires and castles, but there's a lot of little things too. The skeletons, for example, are spot on to those from Castlevania games. Same with the Mandragoras, which look a lot like the Dawn of Sorrow ones, which also reminds me how funny that spell is in that game. Go, my chud son! I could be here all day listing off parallels like the Clock Tower and the Chronomancers, but you get the idea. It's a lot of fun fan service that, like I was saying in the intro, it helps to bring in a new audience who might be familiar with Castlevania, but not really with Touhou. It gives a lot of respect to that series and the genre as a whole, to the point where someone who's coming in with only that knowledge might be able to respect the game a lot more for it. And it works really well since they get to experience a very unique Metroidvania. Even things like getting a little bit of points for putting your can in the garbage when you use a vending machine, that feels like the silly little details you'd find in a game like Symphony of the Night. Of course, it isn't completely perfect. The game doesn't have as much backtracking, and overall it is a pretty short game, though I don't want to get ahead of myself to that. While I probably would have appreciated a bit more elements like backtracking, I also can't say they're really an objective flaw. The game is trying to manage being both a Touhou game and a Metroidvania game, so it makes sense it's landing somewhere in the middle, and it's doing a good job of that. For example, the game is structured with each major area being a stage with a boss at the end, like how Touhou does it. There isn't as much back and forth as there is unlocking a new area and getting what's in there to explore it, as opposed to exploring the whole of the map. It's still pretty fun though, especially those boss fights. You should expect the Touhou fan game to put a lot of effort into the bosses, considering they are a large focus in the main series, and this game does a pretty great job. I'm not going to go too much into the bosses or the plot as a whole, but I will be mentioning a couple things here and there that might be considered spoilers, so this is your warning. If you'd rather not learn about the first 3 bosses, or anything in the later game, I'd skip off now. Though you'd have a hard time not being spoiled considering you'd see every boss in the achievement list. The game is pretty short too, so it's not like it'll take you a while. If that doesn't really matter to you, or you've already played the game, then I'll just get right into it with...
Mei Ling. Samus took her clothes off.
Hong Mei Ling is a pretty great first boss, and also just a pretty cool character. Then again, it's hard for me to not like her. Like how a lot of other fan works depict her, she's using Baji Zhuan here to fight, which is just an awesome fighting style. She even hits the Tetsuzanko in the fighting game spin-off Hisoten Soku. Wow, that's a lot of Japanese words. But I'm getting sidetracked here. She's a really good first boss. On that very first playthrough of mine, she whooped my ass 6 ways from Sunday. But on my second playthrough, the one I actually completed, she was actually not that hard. She wasn't necessarily a pushover, but she felt like a really good first boss in teaching you just how to play the game. Her moves don't overwhelm you. She's a pretty steady fighter, and you'd have a lot of time to react to what she does. But especially with her guard, you don't really feel encouraged to lame her out and just stand back with her projectiles. You really feel encouraged to go for that graze on her projectiles and challenge them instead of just sitting back. And her long air dashes give you really good opportunities to set up a time stop or just slow down time and try and play around that. The set piece of fighting on a bridge is just really cool too, amped up by the music. I'll talk more about music later, but it's a Touhou game. It's gonna be good. While she really doesn't have much more going on with her boss fight, it just does a really good job of teaching the kind of aggression this game allows for. It can help to teach you to break the habit of trying to play away from enemies just because you have a ranged projectile. Instead, you want to play a lot closer and more aggressive when you can. I think 2 of my favorite things to do during this fight were to time stop right when she's about to use a projectile in the air to get her with a couple knives, and especially to find that sweet spot to graze her when she's going for her kick, both jumping up to do it and coming back down. Once you've got her beat is when the game really starts, in my opinion. Makes sense for her since she's serving as a gatekeeper. Now, as I said before, the game is split into stages, which it isn't too functionally far from the named areas of other Metroidvanias, but they are designed and structured a little more like a linear stage that just happen to have a couple things you can come back for, rather than the more open areas that they feel like in other Metroidvanias. Every stage contains one of each of the 4 core upgrades you can earn in the game. They are HP and MP increases, as well as increases to your time stop's duration and the amount of knives you can throw in it. It goes without saying that they're all pretty useful upgrades, but the time stop ones will vary based on your playstyle. I find the knife increase to be one of the most important ones. Especially in boss fights, you can feel like you really have to ration out the knife count you have. Having a little bit more makes a lot of a difference and makes each time stop more effective. Its usefulness doubles if you use the 1000 Knives card in time stop a lot, which is an insanely busted card in its own right. Speaking of, spell cards are both your other main attack and one of your main collectibles. You could think of them sort of like sub-weapons in Castlevania, especially when you consider the one that is just a blatant Castlevania reference. It's towards the end of the game. I did the point when I saw it. I didn't find a lot of them too useful, but there were a handful that came in handy, especially the 1000 Knives. You can pretty much cheat the game with this. It gives you invincibility frames and an insane amount of knives that auto-aim. Cards use the same MP as your knives, so you really have to ration out which one you want to use it on. As I mentioned earlier, you unlock abilities as you go, and in standard Metroidvania fashion, these are the abilities that help you progress through the area you get them in. These are your slide and double jump, but also some knife-specific upgrades that are pretty interesting. I love the grip knife, which lets you stand on them and stop time. It just feels really natural and opens up the world a lot. And lastly, you have the currency of the game, which is gems. These are a little more important than the game actually lets on. They'll appear like just currency at first, and a lot of the items you can spend them on are temporary, so for a player like me, I don't really consider them. But they also give you small buffs to your different stats, which actually can be pretty useful once you start collecting them in bulk. It creates an interesting decision, which the game even reflects a little bit. Do you hold on to all your gems for a bunch of minor but still impactful buffs, or do you cash out for mostly temporary upgrades as well as maybe an extension to your time stop or two? That's about all you'll be bumping into across the stages. As you'd expect, there's your standard affair of save rooms, warp points, etc. And every stage ends with a boss fight, which I always find to be really fun ways of engaging the player and teaching them some new mechanics. Our second boss is one of the most fun in the game, if you ask me. Her fight also might have my favorite theme in the game. It's so good I couldn't stop myself from using it earlier. Oh yeah, this is probably a pretty good time to get into that really quick. The soundtrack bangs, which is to be expected. Touhou itself is already pretty much pristine video game music. And I mean like, specifically video game music. I don't mean like, oh it's metal or drum and bass or one of those other dozen genres that games do a lot that are really good. It's like, the kind of music you only hear in a video game. That isn't to say it doesn't take inspiration from existing genres, but I think you already get my idea here. Lunar Nights is very remix heavy, which ultimately isn't a bad thing. There are some tracks you might end up preferring the original version of, especially when the game takes a little more liberties with those. I found myself a tad bit underwhelmed with some of the later boss themes at first, just because they're some of my favorite themes in the series, even if they have grown on me just that little bit now. I was also surprised, twice, with some of the song selections. This is a song I really anticipated being in, but I didn't know where they'd actually put it. I'm glad they not only did, but they went above and beyond with it. And the first 3 fights all have probably my favorite versions of that respective character's themes. There's some pretty heavy use of bass, the guitar, not the tone, or the fish, in some of these songs, and I absolutely adore it. Probably my favorite song in the game, and undeniably one of my favorite Touhou songs in general, is Love Colored Master Spark. It really uses the energy, especially the build-up of the song, super well. There's a lot of distorted guitars, and especially that aforementioned slap bass, which I love. It's definitely my favorite version of the theme. That theme also belongs to none other than Murasa Kurosame, often considered Touhou's deuteragonist, is fittingly our second boss in the game. She teaches you a lot more about dodging and projectile spacing, especially with her use of time paralysis. While it's true of every boss, she feels like the first and most important boss to really start memorizing her patterns. She spends most of the fight soaring past you on her broom, which gives you very few times to actually attack her without getting hit yourself. But once you find the right balance of knowing when to dodge and knowing when to be on the aggressive, she's not that hard a boss either. You also get the chainsaw spell card right before fighting her, and it can be pretty handy. You throw it upward like the axe from Castlevania. The angle of the throw can make for a pretty good hit if you're right under Marissa, and a particularly good throw can manage to get every tick of damage off on her. My favorite part of the fight is probably when she uses her Master Spark. It looks impossible to dodge at first, but if you slow down time, you can walk right past it and it makes you feel awesome. It's also a small thing, but I really like the way Marissa animates on the broom. It's very smooth. Once you've beat her, I'd say you're about a third of the way through the game. The game is on the shorter side of things. Even my playthrough, which took me a little while and I went back for everything, took me about 7 hours. While I don't want this video to just be one of those that's basically a summary, I do at least want to talk about the next boss before I end it off. She kicks off the part where bosses can actually manipulate your time stop, which makes them a lot more engaging. Patchouli Knowledge, the librarian of the Scarlet Devil Mansion, is the third boss. I think she's supposed to be smart, but I don't know, I can't really tell. She's also asthmatic representation. She also flies above you, which is a trend for all the bosses going forward. But she doesn't fly around wildly unlike Marissa, she usually just looms over you instead. Her spells require some pre-planning and foresight to actually dodge normally, but they're really fun too. You've got different ways to handle each, and it's really satisfying to turn all of them into graze fuel instead of actually being a threat. She might have been the easiest boss for me, it only took me about 2 tries. But I love her attack where she sends out leaves that can only be moved in the stop time. The first few times, I reflectively time stopped to dodge them, so I didn't even realize that they only moved because I stopped time. It's a really fun back and forth when you're ready for them. You have to dodge their initial movement, and in that time predict where they're gonna go. Then quickly get yourself somewhere safely you can time stop and avoid them, before Patchouli can prepare another attack. As I said, later bosses also have time stop manipulating abilities, and they're really fun, particularly the next boss is one I like. But I'm gonna leave the bosses here. I don't want to talk about every single one of them, for plot reasons to keep some surprises. I want to leave some things up to you so you actually go out and play the game. Besides, the final boss has a pretty interesting twist to it. I'm not gonna give you any details on that though. You will know when you actually get there. So is it worth your time and money? Well, I certainly enjoyed my time at the game. I did grab it on sale for about $11 though, which I think is a bit more of a fair price. Especially given that not only do I take my time to explore, but I also just suck, so I take longer on these kinds of games. But even for me, the game did kind of feel on the shorter side. It isn't too hard to feel that the game has a much smaller scope compared to its contemporaries, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but it could certainly be a concern money-wise. With a base price of $18, that is a little bit steep, and I can imagine some people might not want to pay that full price. I don't consider myself an authority on if you should buy a game or not. I just like to talk about some cool games I played sometimes. Not if that immutable and intangible experience of playing the game is worth the quantifiable money you put to get it. And I know people have their own judgments about that, but I could definitely see this being a game people would wait for a sale for. But if you're either a fan of Metroidvanias or of Touhou, I would really recommend this game. Outside of the concerns about the price tag in relation to the amount of gameplay you get out of it, the gameplay is really good. I think even if you want to wait for a sale, you should still check this game out at some point. If you find yourself concerned either about the game being an installment in a franchise you're unfamiliar with, or doing a gameplay style you've never tried before, I feel like you really shouldn't worry so much. I'm not alone in it, but I could definitely vouch that as a non-Touhou fan, this game is really solid. But I also know a lot of Touhou fans not as experienced with this genre who actually enjoyed this game quite a lot. I think people can get a lot more intimidated by these sorts of spin-offs than they really should be. I myself could sometimes be an advocate for trying to properly get into a series by going in the correct order and all, but honestly sometimes people need to not regard that stuff so much. Not every work, even in a long-running series, really needs to build off the series in a way that only fans can enjoy. Sometimes a piece of fiction just stands on its own 2 legs. For something like Lunar Nights, I really feel like people can look at the metaphorical Venn diagram of the audience and think it caters only to the overlap, when in reality, it has a much bigger appeal than that. Of course, people on the outside might not get as much enjoyment out of it as people that fall in that perfect middle ground, but isn't that some of the fun of it too? Especially in people's childhood, you can get into a lot of stuff just from the weirdest places, but that creates a sort of fondness for them all the same. I mean, even staying within video games, how many kids got into Star Wars in the 2000s because of games like Battlefront and the LEGO series? Honestly, there's a whole lot to be said about ignoring all these ideas of needing to catch up with the series or having enough prior knowledge on the source material and just diving right into something that interests you. Hell, if you get an interest in Touhou, but bullet hells aren't really up your alley, and Lunar Nights doesn't seem like it's doing it for you either, there's definitely other fan games out there that might be your cup of tea. I've barely even scratched the surface of Touhou fan games. Just looking them up on Steam, there's a dozen you'll find. For my fighting game heads out there, I mentioned Hisoten Soku earlier, which is a really deep and complicated game. I barely have a grasp on it, but it does seem like a blast once everything clicks for you. I'll let you know once I understand anything. Hell, just now as I'm doing the literal final recording on this video, with my recommendations sent to the Touhou algorithm ringer, YouTube ended up showing me the trailer for another fan game that's coming out soon, a platformer that's called Sooner Lifts a Boulder. It looks pretty cute. I might have to check it out, honestly. I really do love that this franchise just lets people do whatever little things they want. That might leave a lot of gotchas and shitpost games too, but it's really neat seeing whatever people want to do with this franchise. And it means if you look hard enough, I'm sure there's a Touhou fan game that's really up your alley and can help you get into this series if you struggle with that up to this point. Lunar Nights could just end up being that gateway drug for me. I understand there's layers and depths to getting into new things and experiences, but I also think people can get a little too intimidated by things for no real reason. And I think Lunar Nights is a pretty perfect example of a game where you really shouldn't let that intimidation get to you. Even if you don't really know anything about any of its inspirations, it's just a really solid time. As much as its fan service elements are nice, underneath is still a really solid game, and I think people really shouldn't discount that. If it looks at all interesting to you, or anything I've said in this video has convinced you, I really think you should check it out. It's on Steam, as well as most consoles, and buying it will be supporting a pretty small studio. And hey, after you beat it, you could say you beat more Touhou games than the average Touhou fan.